Welcome to Sinister Stories, where the shadows hold more than just secrets. If you're a fan of the dark and the twisted, you're in the right place. Tonight, we dive into a tale that will send chills down your spine. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss a single spine-tingling story. When I first had the idea to spend a night in Six Flags Magic Mountain after closing, I thought it was genius. My YouTube channel, Josh's Overnight Adventures, was all about pushing boundaries, sneaking into places I wasn't supposed to be, and giving my viewers a thrill. I mean, what could be more thrilling than a theme park after dark? Rides still as tombstones. The eerie silence where hours before there was laughter and screaming. It was perfect. Or so I thought. The park closed at 9 p.m. sharp. I'd planned everything meticulously. I bought a ticket for the day, blended in with the crowds, and scoped out a hiding spot at the Dippin' Dots stand near the Batman ride. It wasn't hard to crouch under the table without being seen, surrounded by empty plastic tubs and the sticky, sweet smell of melted ice cream. My heart raced as I heard the final announcement over the intercom. The park is now closed. Employees, have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow. The lights dimmed, casting the park in long, eerie shadows. I waited, holding my breath, as a security guard strolled past with a flashlight. My pulse pounded in my ears, but he didn't look under the table. After what felt like an eternity, his footsteps faded, and I counted 10 more minutes to be safe. At last, I slipped out of my hiding spot. My phone was fully charged, my camera app ready to roll. I hit record. What's up, guys? This is Josh, and welcome to another episode of Josh's Overnight Adventures. Tonight I'm bringing you something epic. I'm inside Six Flags Magic Mountain, after hours. Let's see what this place is like when the crowds are gone. I kept my voice low as I walked. The park was so different without the noise and lights. The roller coasters loomed overhead like skeletal giants, and the air was unnervingly still. I filmed the empty food stalls, the locked gates of the rides, and the bizarre quiet of what was usually chaos. Then, it happened. A gust of wind came out of nowhere, rustling the trash in a nearby can. I turned toward the sound, my camera catching the moment as a piece of paper fluttered out and landed at my feet. Frowning, I picked it up. The paper was grimy and wrinkled, but the words scrawled across it sent a shiver down my spine. Night rule of the park. If you see this, the park knows you're here. You cannot hide from what's coming. My stomach dropped. What the hell? I whispered. The camera was still rolling as I turned the paper over, but the back was blank. Was this some kind of prank? Had an employee set this up for trespassers like me? This can't be real, I said, trying to laugh it off. But the unease crept in anyway. How would the park know I was here? Did they have cameras I didn't see? Motion sensors? I shoved the note into my pocket, telling myself it was nothing. Then I heard it. Music. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A jaunty tune that sounded like it belonged to a carousel. The problem was, I wasn't anywhere near the carousel. All right, this is getting weird, I muttered. But weird was good for views, right? So I followed the sound, my camera capturing the surreal emptiness of the park. The music grew louder, leading me toward the Batman ride. That's when something lunged at me from the shadows. I jumped back, my heart slamming against my ribs, as a life-sized Batman costume, the kind they used for meet and greets, staggered into view. Its cape flapped as if caught in a wind I couldn't feel. You shouldn't be here, it rasped. The voice was mechanical, tinny, like it came from a speaker inside the costume. Before I could respond, the costume crumpled to the ground, empty. Oh, hell no, I said, backing away. I kept filming, zooming in on the collapsed pile of fabric. There was no actor inside, no animatronics, just an empty suit. I wanted to turn around, run straight for the exit, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was pride. My audience expected me to be fearless, and I wasn't about to let some weird Halloween trick ruin my video. Okay, guys, things are getting spooky, I whispered into the camera. I'm not sure what that was, but I'm gonna keep exploring. Let's see what else this park has in store. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The collapsed Batman costume lay in the shadows, unmoving. I told myself it was some kind of leftover prop or prank, but the sinking feeling in my gut refused to leave. The note in my pocket seemed heavier with every step I took. Turning the camera back on myself, I forced a grin. All right, guys, that was, unexpected. But hey, this is what Josh's overnight adventures is all about, right? We're just getting started. My voice wavered slightly and I hated myself for it. I was supposed to be fearless, the guy who laughed in the face of danger. I started walking again, sticking close to the main paths. The park felt unnervingly vast without the crowds. Rides loomed like sleeping giants, their frames creaking softly in the cool night breeze. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the park itself was aware of my every move. Then I heard it again, the faint whimsical tune of a carousel. It seemed to echo from somewhere far off, weaving its way through the silent park. But I wasn't anywhere near the carousel. My pulse quickened. Okay, where's that music coming from? I whispered, more to myself than to the camera. As I followed the sound, the park seemed to change. Pathways that should have been familiar stretched longer, and turns appeared where I was sure they hadn't been before. I tried to shake off the feeling of being herded, but every step made it worse. Suddenly the music stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I froze, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, voices, even the hum of machinery. That's when I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the path, barely illuminated by a flickering lamppost. My first thought was that it was a security guard, and my stomach dropped. But as I raised my camera, zooming in, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was another costume, a clown, its painted smile twisted and grotesque in the dim light. Hey! I called out, trying to sound casual. You lost or something? The clown tilted its head unnaturally far to the side like a puppet on strings. Then it took a step forward, jerky and disjointed, as if it didn't know how to walk properly. My breath hitched. Nope, 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 I muttered, backing away. The clown stopped, then raised a hand to point directly at me. I turned and bolted. The camera shook wildly as I ran, my sneakers pounding against the pavement. I didn't stop until I was sure I'd put enough distance between myself and whatever that thing was. Ducking behind a food stand, I crouched low, struggling to catch my breath. All right, guys, I whispered into the camera. Things just got a whole lot creepier. I don't know what's going on, but there's no way that clown was normal. My voice cracked, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. Pulling out the note again, I reread the ominous words. If you see this, the park knows you're here. You cannot hide from what's coming. My hands trembled. Was the clown part of whatever the note was warning me about? And how could a place like this have such a sinister secret? I decided to keep moving, sticking to the shadows. The lights were almost completely out now, save for the occasional flicker from a broken bulb. The eerie quiet was broken only by the faint creak of rides swaying in the wind. Then, as I turned a corner, I nearly screamed. A Ferris wheel cabin hung low in front of me, its glass fogged from the inside. I froze, staring as the fog began to clear. A handprint appeared on the glass. 5 long, spindly fingers pressed against the surface. What the... I took a step back, my foot crunching on broken popcorn kernels. The handprint slid down the glass as if whoever or whatever was inside was watching me leave. Guys, this is not what I signed up for, I whispered into the camera. My voice was shaking now, panic clawing at my chest. I think I need to... A loud clang cut me off. The sound echoed through the park, metallic and jarring. It came from the direction of the Goliath coaster. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned toward the sound. The coaster's towering frame loomed in the darkness, its tracks twisting like the ribs of some enormous skeleton. The clang came again, louder this time. I raised my camera, scanning the ride's massive structure. That's when I saw it. At the peak of the coaster's first drop, a shadowy figure stood silhouetted against the night sky. It was too far away to make out any details, but I could tell it was tall, inhumanly so. The figure raised an arm pointing down the track, toward me. The figure at the top of the coaster didn't move, but the sense of dread that gripped me was unbearable. Its long arm pointed down at me, and even from this distance I could feel its gaze, cold, piercing, and unrelenting. My fingers trembled as I kept the camera trained on the towering silhouette. "What is that?" I whispered, more to myself than to the audience. The words felt small, swallowed by the suffocating silence of the park. Then the figure leaped. I gasped as it descended impossibly fast, bounding down the coaster tracks with unnatural grace. The sound of metal creaking under its weight sent chills down my spine. I spun on my heel and bolted, the camera still clutched in my hand. My sneakers pounded against the pavement, echoing through the empty park. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear it, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of something heavy pursuing me. The paths twisted and turned, and I struggled to remember the layout of the park. Was I heading toward the exit, or deeper into this nightmare? Ahead, the Looney Tunes-themed section of the park came into view. The cartoonish decor looked grotesque in the dim light. Bugs Bunny's giant smiling face loomed over the entrance, its cheerful expression now sinister and mocking. I darted into the area, weaving between oversized props and garishly painted structures. The sound of pursuit grew louder, closer. Desperation clawed at me as I scanned for somewhere, anywhere, to hide. A photo booth caught my eye, its curtain partially drawn. Without thinking, I dove inside and yanked the curtain shut. My chest heaved as I tried to quiet my breathing. The small space reeked of stale popcorn and plastic, but I didn't care. The thud, thud, thud stopped. Silence. I strained to hear, my ears picking up nothing but the faint hum of the booth's machinery. Had it lost me? I didn't dare move, not even to peek outside. My camera was still recording, the lens pointed at the grimy wall in front of me. Then the booth's screen flickered to life. I nearly dropped the camera as a distorted image appeared. It was the clown from earlier, its painted face filling the screen. The image warped and crackled, but the clown's expression was unmistakable, gleefully malevolent. "You can't hide, Josh," it rasped, its voice distorted and buzzing like static. My blood ran cold. How did it know my name? The screen went black and the curtain was yanked open. I screamed, swinging my camera wildly, but there was no one there. The booth was empty, the path outside deserted. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled out, the fear now a suffocating weight in my chest. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," I said into the camera, my voice shaking. "Whoever's doing this, you win. I'm done." But deep down, I knew this wasn't a prank. No amount of rationalizing could explain what I'd seen. As I backed away from the booth, something cold brushed against my arm. I spun around, nearly dropping the camera, but nothing was there. The air felt thick, charged, as if the park itself was alive and breathing. Then, in the distance, I saw movement. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking slowly toward me. It wasn't the tall figure from the coaster or the clown. It was something else entirely. The figure was humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending in ways they shouldn't. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose cable and landing hard on the pavement. The camera clattered to the ground, still recording. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure didn't stop. Scrambling to my feet, I grabbed the camera and took off running again. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but adrenaline kept me moving. The paths twisted and turned, and I realized with horror that I was lost. The distant music of the carousel started up again, faint but growing louder with each step I took. It was as if the park was leading me somewhere, herding me like prey. I burst into an open plaza near the carousel, the gaudy ride spinning lazily under dim lights. But something was wrong. The horses were moving on their own, their eyes glowing red as they turned to watch me. My heart hammered in my chest as the ride slowed to a stop. One of the horses, a grotesque black stallion with jagged teeth, tilted its head and let out a low, guttural growl. Nope, 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 I stammered, backing away. But before I could turn, the tall figure from the coaster emerged from the shadows. It stood at the edge of the plaza, its long limbs twitching as it stepped closer. Trapped. I swung the camera around wildly, searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. The figure took another step, its movements jerky and unnatural. "This isn't real," I whispered, clutching the camera like a lifeline. "It can't be real." The carousel's music reached a crescendo, the haunting melody filling the air. The horses began to move again, their glowing eyes fixed on me. The tall figure raised an impossibly long arm, pointing directly at me. And then, everything went dark. When I came to, the world was a blur of distorted lights and muffled sounds. My head throbbed, and it took me a moment to remember where I was, or what had happened. Slowly, I realized I was lying on cold metal. The scent of grease and old machinery filled my nostrils. I was on a ride platform. "How did I get here?" I muttered, my voice shaky. My camera was still clutched in my hand, but the screen was cracked, flickering dimly. It had continued recording, capturing snippets of the chaos I couldn't recall. Glimpses of dark figures, twisted ride structures, and the eerie glow of those malevolent eyes. I pushed myself up, scanning my surroundings. The platform belonged to the Goliath roller coaster, the tallest ride in the park. The towering track spiraled above me, disappearing into the night sky. The cars were still, suspended halfway up the first drop. A voice crackled to life over the ride's intercom system, distorted and low. "Welcome to the game, Josh." My stomach twisted. "What game?" I shouted, spinning in place. My voice echoed, but there was no response. Then the sound of grinding metal filled the air. I turned toward the coaster, horrified as the suspended cars began to move, without anyone inside them. They creaked and groaned, descending the tracks with an unnatural slowness, as if the ride itself was watching me. "You must play to survive," the voice continued, followed by a static-filled laugh. Before I could respond, the platform beneath my feet jolted, tilting dangerously. I stumbled, barely managing to stay upright. The lights flickered, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the ride was powering on. "No, no, no," I muttered, backing away from the edge. The cars sped up, hurtling around the track at breakneck speed. The grinding metal grew deafening, the vibrations rattling my bones. I had to get off the platform before I became the ride's next victim. I ran, searching for an exit, but the path was blocked by heavy chains and a padlocked gate. Panic clawed at me as I yanked at the lock, but it didn't budge. Behind me, the ride screeched to a stop, and I turned to see the empty cars waiting at the platform. The intercom crackled again. "Get in, or the park takes you." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Takes me? What does that mean?" As if in answer, the shadows around the platform began to shift. Figures emerged, their forms warped and featureless, like living voids in the shape of people. They moved slowly, deliberately, closing in on me from all sides. "Okay, okay!" I shouted, throwing up my hands. I approached the coaster car with trembling steps and climbed inside. The restraints locked down over my shoulders, and the car lurched forward. The ride began its ascent, the click, click, click of the chain lift echoing into the night. I gripped the safety bar tightly, my heart pounding as the ground fell away beneath me. The park sprawled out in eerie silence, the lights casting distorted shadows across the twisted rides. As I neared the top of the first drop, the car stopped abruptly. The silence was suffocating, broken only by my ragged breathing. The intercom crackled again. "Look behind you!" Every fiber of my being screamed not to, but I couldn't resist. Slowly, I turned my head. The tall figure from before was sitting in the car behind me. Its impossibly long limbs were contorted to fit, its glowing eyes fixed on me with predatory glee. I screamed, thrashing against the restraints, but they held me in place. The figure leaned closer, its cold breath brushing against my neck. "You're not leaving," it whispered, its voice low and guttural. The car suddenly plunged down the drop, and my stomach flipped as I was hurtled into the ride's twisted loops and sharp turns. The figure's laughter echoed behind me, mixing with the screech of the wheels on the track. But this wasn't a normal ride. The track seemed to shift and change, leading me through impossible paths. At one point, we hurtled straight toward another coaster, only for it to vanish at the last second. The figure behind me never faltered, its laughter growing louder with each twist and turn. Finally, the ride came to a screeching halt in the middle of a dark tunnel. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of machinery. "Your turn, Josh," the voice over the intercom said. "Run." The restraints released, and I tumbled out of the car, landing hard on the metal tracks. I scrambled to my feet, looking around frantically. The figure was gone, but I could feel its presence, watching, waiting. The tunnel stretched ahead, a faint light visible in the distance. With no other choice, I ran. My footsteps echoed as I sprinted down the tracks, the light growing brighter with each step. But the air grew heavier, colder, as if the darkness was closing in around me. Then I heard it, the sound of something large moving behind me. I glanced back and saw the roller coaster cars barreling toward me, their headlights glowing red like demon eyes. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning as the light at the end of the tunnel grew closer. The cars gained on me, the screech of metal deafening. With a final burst of energy, I dove out of the tunnel and onto solid ground. The cars roared past, vanishing into the night. I lay there, gasping for air, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. But as I looked around, I realized I wasn't safe. The park was different now. The rides were moving on their own, their shadows twisting and writhing like living things. The laughter of the clown echoed in the distance, followed by the distorted tune of the carousel. And in the center of it all stood the tall figure, waiting. The figure didn't move, but its presence was like a weight pressing down on my chest. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, daring me to act. I was frozen in place, my mind screaming for me to run, but my body refused to listen. Then it tilted its head, a slow and deliberate motion, as though savoring my fear. Its elongated arms raised slightly, and the shadows around it began to ripple and spread, consuming everything in their path. "No," I whispered, stumbling back. The world seemed to close in, the air thick and suffocating. The carousel in the distance screeched to a halt, its music warping into a discordant mess. The laughter from the clown cut off abruptly, replaced by a low growl that vibrated in my chest. I turned and ran. The ground beneath me felt uneven, shifting with every step. The ride seemed to twist and distort, their skeletal frames looming like monstrous predators. I didn't know where I was going. There was no map, no guide, only the desperate instinct to survive. As I rounded a corner, I nearly collided with the funhouse I had seen earlier. Its gaudy facade was dimmed now, the lights flickering erratically. The entrance yawned open, the mirrors inside reflecting twisted versions of myself. "You can't run forever, Josh." The voice was everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me in a chilling echo. I stumbled into the funhouse, hoping the maze of mirrors would buy me some time. Inside, the air was colder, the silence oppressive. My distorted reflection stared back at me from every angle, each one more grotesque than the last. Some mirrors made me impossibly tall, others compressed me into a hunched, misshapen figure. But as I moved, I realized something was wrong. Not all of the reflections were mine. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. In one mirror, a figure stood behind me, a pale, eyeless version of myself. Its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. My heart pounded as I navigated the maze, each step accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps that weren't mine. The mirrors seemed to close in, their edges sharp and jagged. Whispers filled the air, too quiet to understand but loud enough to keep me on edge. Finally, I reached the center of the funhouse, a circular room lined with mirrors. In the middle stood the tall figure, its form even more nightmarish in the warped reflections. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised one elongated hand and pointed at me. The mirrors around the room began to crack, thin lines spidering across their surfaces. "You broke the rules," it said, its voice a guttural snarl. "I didn't know," I shouted. "You didn't tell me what they were." The figure tilted its head again, as if amused. "The rules are not for you to understand. They are for you to obey." The cracks in the mirrors spread, and the air grew heavy with the sound of shattering glass. One by one, the mirrors exploded, shards raining down around me. The room seemed to collapse in on itself, and I fell to my knees, shielding my face. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the ticket booth. The park was silent, the ride still. The only light came from the faint glow of the booth's interior. I stood slowly, my body aching. Was it over? Had I escaped? I approached the booth cautiously, peering inside. The cash register sat open, the money untouched. My belongings were still there, exactly as I had left them. But then I noticed the notebook, the one I had skimmed through earlier, the one I had dismissed as nonsense. It was open now, its pages filled with neat, handwritten rules. Never enter the park after midnight. If the lights flicker, leave immediately. Avoid the clown at all costs. If the tall figure appears, do not acknowledge it. Always lock the ticket booth door. My stomach dropped as I read the last rule. If you break any of these rules, you belong to the park. "No," I whispered, stepping back. My heart raced as I turned toward the exit, hoping, praying that I could still leave. But the gates were gone. In their place stood an endless row of twisted rides, their shadows stretching out like claws. The laughter of the clown echoed in the distance, joined by the haunting tune of the carousel. And then I heard it, the voice. "Welcome to the park, Josh." The shadows shifted, and I felt the ground beneath me give way. The ground swallowed me whole. I fell into darkness, the world around me twisting and shifting into a kaleidoscope of nightmarish shapes. Screams echoed in the void, some sounding distant, others unnervingly close. When I landed, it was with a bone-jarring thud. The air was cold and thick, making it hard to breathe. I pushed myself up, my palms scraping against a gritty, uneven surface. I was no longer in the park, or at least not the version I knew. The rides loomed taller, their frames warped into grotesque shapes. Roller coasters twisted into impossible spirals, disappearing into the blackened sky. The carousel stood in the distance, its horses snarling, their eyes glowing red. I wasn't alone. Figures moved in the shadows, their forms just out of focus. Some were like the tall figure I had seen before, while others resembled park employees, their uniforms tattered and faces blank. They didn't approach but circled me like predators sizing up their prey. A voice broke the silence, deep and commanding. "Welcome, new caretaker." I spun around to see the tall figure standing atop what once might have been the Superman ride. Its eyes burned brighter than before, and its elongated arms stretched out as if embracing the twisted park. "What do you mean, caretaker?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "You broke the rules. You are now bound to the park just as the others before you." "No!" I backed away, shaking my head. "I didn't sign up for this. I was just here for a video." The figure descended, its movements fluid and unnaturally fast. It towered over me, its shadow stretching out to envelop the ground. "Your intentions are irrelevant. The rules exist to protect the balance. You disrupted it, and now you must restore it." Before I could argue, the ground beneath us trembled. The twisted rides groaned as if alive, their metal frames bending and contorting. The figures in the shadows grew bolder, stepping closer, their blank faces fixed on me. "You will ensure the park's survival," the tall figure continued. "Maintain the rules. Enforce them. Fail and the park will consume you." "I can't do this," I shouted. "I won't." The figure tilted its head, and for the first time, its voice softened. "You have no choice." Suddenly, I was no longer standing in the twisted version of the park. I was back at the ticket booth. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the rides. The park looked normal again, pristine, welcoming. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had woken from a nightmare. But when I turned, I saw the notebook on the counter. The same rules stared back at me, but now, there was a new line written at the bottom. The park always needs a caretaker. My heart sank as the reality of my situation set in. The first guests began to arrive, their laughter and excitement filling the air. I tried to call out to them, to warn them to leave, but my voice caught in my throat. My body wouldn't obey me, as though an invisible force held me in place. The day passed in a blur. I greeted guests, handed out maps, and smiled like everything was normal. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the last guest left, the park's true face emerged once more. The shadows deepened, the rides grown to life, and the rules took hold again. I was trapped in an endless cycle, bound to a park that fed on fear and chaos, and no one would ever know